One of the earliest settlers in the Western Reserve was Revolutionary War veteran Christian Cackler Sr. At the first of the year 1804, he and his two sons, Abraham 15 and Christian Jr. 11, emigrated from Pennsylvania. They established their home on land east of the Cuyahoga River, which at that time was an untouched wilderness filled only with wildlife and Native Americans. Upon arriving in Hudson Township, they navigated by following blazed trees to locate Lot 10, and without delay, they began clearing the land using only an axe.
In April 1804, together with my father and eldest brother, I came to Ohio. We brought with us one horse, one yoke of oxen, and what we could carry on the horse. We crossed the Ohio River at Steubenville and continued through Yellow Creek and then Deerfield, where there were a few families living at that time, and Ravenna, where there were also several families by the name of Wright. At that time, there was a road marked out to Hudson, and some of the underbrush cut. We passed on to Hudson, where we found our stopping place. Father bought half of lot number 10 in the southeast corner of the township. On selecting our site, we relieved our horse, cut 4 forks, and drove them into the ground, upon which we laid wooden poles and covered the sides and top with bark, also constructed a bark floor. Our beds filled with leaves and blankets spread, we were ready for operation. At that time, this country was an unbroken wilderness, filled up with wild men and wild animals, probably 40 Indians to one white man. They were very friendly and peaceable. There were 3 tribes that inhabited this section of country: the Senecas, the Taways, the Chippeways. They appeared to live very friendly with each other as tribes. We commenced by clearing land for spring crops. It was then the 10th of May, 1804. We got in about 3 acres of corn and cleared off a piece in time to sow wheat.
Throughout the summer, they tended to their crops while subsisting on game from the dense woods. They remained dedicated to their work all summer long. On June 27th, Christian Jr. turned 12 years old. Come autumn, Mr. Cackler and his eldest son, Abraham, traveled to Pennsylvania to retrieve Mrs. Cackler and their other children. Meanwhile, Christian Jr. remained behind to tend to their shanty and crops.
In September, my father and brother went back after the family and left me in care of the shanty until they returned. I was then only 12 years of age. They left for my use a small loaf of bread, an old rifle that carried an 0-ounce ball, and some powder and bullets that I might kill squirrels for meat. They expected to be back in 3 weeks.
The closest neighbor lived 4 to 5 miles away, deep within an uninterrupted ancient forest, where wolves, bears, and wild cats roamed freely. The 12-year-old boy found himself entirely alone for a stretch of 2 months. Although the bread, powder, and ammunition provided sustenance to combat hunger and starvation, they did little to alleviate his feelings of solitude and loneliness.
It was a trying time for me. I could get along very well through the day, but when night came, I was lonesome indeed. I would build a big fire and roll myself up in my blankets so that I could not hear anything, and there I remained until morning.
While this would be quite challenging for a man, imagine how much more difficult it would be for a boy. Even having a dog for companionship would have alleviated the loneliness. Yet Christian had no such comfort. He was utterly alone in a forest that extended 120 miles east and west, and almost twice that north and south.
I managed for about 2 weeks. My loaf began to get very small, and I had to make my allowance still smaller to make it hold out. The 3 weeks expired, and nobody came. The 4th week wore slowly on, and no one came. My bread was gone, and I had to live on squirrels alone.
On the Wednesday morning of the 5th week, he woke up early and immediately set out to check his snares again. This time, luck was on his side. He discovered a pheasant in one of them. Excited, he headed home and soon had dinner simmering away.
The 5th week expired, and still I was alone, now with no bread, no bullets. What to do I did not know. It is said that necessity is the mother of invention. There was a necessity for my doing something, so I went down to the brook and picked up small stones, which I used in place of bullets. I managed to kill some squirrels this way.
He spent the remainder of the day at home crafting new snares. Prior to this, heavy frosts had occurred, and that evening, a strong wind picked up and blew throughout the night. On Thursday morning, he checked his snares again and set out his new ones. He experienced several thrilling chases after squirrels, using only stones and clubs as his weapon. After several hours, he grew discouraged and decided to stop. On his way back, he stumbled upon a chestnut tree, from which the frosts and high winds of the previous night had knocked down many nuts. He collected over a quart and, a bit further along, found hickory nuts scattered on the ground. He boiled the chestnuts, cracked the hickory nuts, and enjoyed both for a meal. On Friday, fortune smiled upon him as he caught 2 pheasants in his snares, which he paired with nuts for his meals throughout the day. Saturday brought a storm, so he remained sheltered all day. As evening approached, the clouds cleared slightly, allowing Christian to gather some nuts for supper. On Sunday, the sun shone for several hours, and he managed to catch a squirrel. But the prolonged hunger was taking its toll on the boy, sapping his spirit and leaving him weaker. The Monday of the 6th week began with a cloudy sky and a biting cold wind. He trudged through the woods all day but encountered no signs of life. However, he did manage to collect a peck of hickory nuts and several quarts of chestnuts. By Tuesday morning, the sun was fierce, and by the afternoon, snow began to fall. He checked his snares but found them empty. As mid-October approached, the pleasant weather had vanished, leaving him to face only strong winds, chilly rains, and snow. His father had promised to return in 3 weeks, but that time frame had long passed, causing the boy to feel disheartened. When Wednesday arrived, the snow finally transformed into a cold, dismal rain that fell relentlessly throughout the day. He found himself in a desperate state, having survived on nothing but nuts for the past couple weeks. Weak, emaciated, heartbroken, homesick, and hungry, he had not encountered a single human face or heard a human voice in a long while. Overwhelmed, he broke down in tears and eventually cried himself to sleep. Upon waking, the rain continued to pour, and to make matters worse, a leak had developed in the roof. The wood was soaked, and the fire had gone out. He attempted to rekindle it, but the wet wood refused to ignite. As darkness fell, he searched for the driest spot and curled up under his blanket, covering his head, but sleep eluded him that night. As night descended, the howling wolves encircled the bark shack, creating an eerie atmosphere. Fortunately, they did not attempt to breach the fragile shelter, despite his fears. With dawn's light, he checked his snares one last time, only to find them all empty. A sudden determination washed over him. He would leave this place. He resolved to seek out another person in the wilderness, yearning to see a human face and hear a human voice once more before his time ran out. After walking for over 3 hours, he heard the unmistakable sound of an axe striking wood in the forest. What a joyful sound. It was more appealing to him than the sweetest melodies. He pinpointed the direction and started towards the sound. After about half an hour, he spotted a man chopping down trees. Approaching from behind, he greeted him with a cheerful, "Hello!" The man dropped his axe in surprise and turned around.
"Well, I swan,"
Was all Harry O'Brien, an Irishman, could say.
I am really hungry, sir. Can I have something to eat?
"Well, I swan. Who are you, anyway?"
My name is Christian Cackler, and I'm starving.
Answered the 12-year-old boy.
"Well, I swan. Come on."
But the boy had fainted. Mr. O'Brien scooped up the lad and started for his cabin and his wife. They tended to him over the next 2 weeks, until his parents returned from Pennsylvania. Christian Cackler continued working beside his father and brothers until he turned 15 in 1807, when he was bound out until he turned 21 years old. He then enlisted in the War of 1812, married in 1814, and moved to Kent. He became known as one of the greatest woodsmen around and lived and greatly prospered until 1878, when he passed away at the age of 87.